Everybody, Luke McElroy from Mess Performance Consulting, back on another episode of Physiology Secrets podcast. Joined today with Nick Jankowskis over a Zoom call. And today we're just going to answer a question that came through the other day, talking about the difference between tempo and threshold training. Nick, do you want to give us a quick overview of the two main differences from our perspective?
Yeah, so really what we're looking at here, I think the basis of the question stem from a bit of confusion around zone 3 in general. So obviously when we talk about training zones in a 5-zone system, tempo and threshold kind of get bunched together. So really we're looking at what's going to be most specific for what you're trying to achieve. If we're looking at improving threshold, specifically threshold, so whether that's a 5K running performance, a 20-minute type time trial on the bike, whatever it is, you want to be working at or maybe just above threshold ideally to be really getting a quality stimulus. So we're looking at interval-based training typically, because going out and trying to hold 20 minutes at a time at or just above your threshold is going to be difficult. So you're not going to be able to do that for extended blocks. So doing an hour of that straight out is going to be really hard. Maybe doing 105% of your threshold for 8 minutes on and then having a short recovery and then going again is going to be a bit more sustainable. So we can keep the intensity up, quality across the session, as opposed to having to drop off partway through and sort of missing out a little bit. Tempo is more that really, then it comes down to, well, tempo is probably backing off the pace a little bit. It's that top end of zone 2 leading in towards threshold, but not quite. So it's going to be more sustainable. And typically that's going to be more around that. Are we focusing for a slightly longer distance event, maybe closer instead of a 5K or a 10K runner, we're maybe talking maybe half marathon runner now, where we're not wanting to just cruise and sit on that long slow intensity, but we're more wanting to just push the pace a little bit. But so we need to get a bit of that fatigue in the legs to be able to resist it. But we don't want to be sitting necessarily too far up and above threshold and burning ourselves out too early. So really, I think the question we need to answer is what's specific for the individual, and then which part of that zone 3 or which part of tempo threshold are we going to more so focus on, which is a pretty sort of common topic that we talk about a lot. Is just specificity. What are you trying to achieve out of your training, and then align that with the type and the intensity of training that you're going to be doing.
Yeah, spot on. And I mean, we could easily do a 6-zone system and include tempo. And there's 3-zone systems, 5, 6. I've seen 11-zone systems. It doesn't matter how many zones you've got. You just need to know what the goal of that session is. So if we were to put some rough numbers on it, like say we don't prescribe a tempo zone, but we easily could just make the first half of our threshold zone tempo and the second half of our threshold zone as threshold. So if you're looking at some numbers, roughly speaking, a threshold set would be somewhere between sort of 95 and maybe 105% of your threshold of your FTP, and a tempo you probably take off about 10%, 85 to 95. So from a stimulative point of view, you're always better to train either easy or hard. So either in your zone 2 doing your aerobic benefits or right on threshold or above to get maximum stimulus there. However, I always say to the guys that we coach and anyone who comes in that although threshold is the most stimulating compared to tempo is the most race specific. So you want to do your threshold work so you can improve your threshold and hold a higher pace for longer and put up with the lactic acid and burn the legs. However, when you actually get really close to race day, maybe 6 weeks out, you want to do a bit more tempo stuff because that's going to be the most specific for a marathon runner, for a triathlete, whatever it is. You're not going really easy. You're not going really hard in a race. You're trying to hold a comfortably hard pace, which is your tempo. For a few hours. So tempo is definitely the most race specific session, and something that I prescribe to guys, 6 to 8 weeks out to get used to holding that intensity in a race. But further than 8 weeks out, I'd prefer to do either your zone 2 easy or your threshold right on the limit, 100% of threshold. So you actually get the fitness improvements from that. And as you mentioned before, if you could try to hold, threshold, theoretically you can hold it for 45 to 60 minutes continuously, but mentally that is absolutely, it's not impossible.
You're going to be
very, very hard to
45
do.
minutes as well. Yeah, you're not going to be able to repeat any of it. It's pretty much 45 minutes are done doing that flat out effort. Whereas if you sort of break it up a little bit, well, maybe we can accumulate 45 minutes, but we can do multiple efforts at it, and we're actually extending the total time on legs or whatever it is out, so we can manipulate a bit of the loading a bit differently.
I think if you ask the guys that do the hour record on the bike, they would agree it's probably the hardest race they've ever done or the hardest event they've ever done. And that's basically just 60 minutes on threshold, maybe 102% threshold, 103% threshold, but you're basically on threshold the whole time. So yes, you can do it, but you wouldn't want to do that 3 times a week for 12 weeks leading into a race, because 60 minutes continuously is going to be very, very physically, but also very, very mentally draining to do. So you can break it down into whatever it is, 5, 10, 20-minute efforts. Occasionally I might do a 30-minute effort on the bike where that's pretty strenuous. You have about half the rest and you go again. So lactic acid in, lactic acid out, so on and so forth. But it is hard to hold that continuously versus a tempo session where you would hold that for 90 minutes, potentially. You could do 30, 60, 90 minutes continuously. You're really trying to go at a comfortably hard pace. So in terms of my summary between the differences, say threshold is a more stimulative session. It's good for improving your functional threshold, but a tempo is a little bit easier, 5-10% easier, which you would hold for a longer duration, 30, 60, 90 minutes, and it's more race specific and gets you used to the demands of race day. Anything to add on that? Or does that pretty much cover it?
No, I think it's pretty much it. Like we said, specificity is the key. It's if you're going to be racing in and around that sort of, I guess, that tempo range, like we're saying. I mean, if you're that type of athlete that's going to be sitting on that, it's not flat out the entire way. You're not on threshold, but you're not cruising. Yeah, it's going to be specific and useful in your training. But if you're a 5K runner, like you probably, like, is it really meaningful to you to be doing too much tempo running? Is it going to provide, I guess that's probably something, do you want to quickly elaborate on? Is there a benefit of doing tempo if you're going to be racing either side of it anyway? Like, obviously it's specific if you're racing at that sort of tempo type intensity, but if you're a 5K runner trying to run on the limit for 18 minutes, 17 minutes, whatever it may be, is it worth doing tempo? I guess it's part of his question as well.
Yeah, I'd probably say not really. You know, you could do it, but it's probably, tempo is that grey zone that everybody talks about. It's not easy and it's not hard. So it's sort of, you're not getting the maximum aerobic benefits and you're not getting the maximum, FTP benefits. So if you are racing a 5K, I'm trying to think if there's taking science out of it. Is there another reason why you might use it? Maybe for purely from a variety standpoint, just to keep the athletes motivated and that sort of thing. But from a physiological standpoint, not really. Like, tempo is, in my opinion, is very much a race-specific session for the guys that are doing marathon racing and things that you can't hold threshold the whole way, but you're pretty close. It's more beneficial to them. So from a stimulative standpoint, not really. I'd be going easier or harder to get the maximum fitness benefits. From a variety, from a psychological perspective, maybe you could throw a few in there just to keep the sessions interesting. But in my opinion, not from a physiological standpoint. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I'm pretty similar. So, I mean, why sort of limit, I guess, the intensity you're doing in that session? You may as well do either side of it, as we said before. Either go really hard in the session to get that, really boost the top end of your engine or boost the percentage of your engine you can hold, or go easy to get that really positive aerobic stimulus as well. Again, looking at all the factors, it's like, well, is it really applicable to that type of running? Yes or no? If it is, then maybe it's worthwhile. And like we said, for the variety aspect, it could be useful, but is it giving us a physiological benefit? Not really as much. So I tend to not really prescribe it unless it, like we said before, unless it is that, all right, we're going for a very specific purpose. Maybe it's, I typically prescribe it for triathletes in particular as like a run off the bike session. Like, we might do half an hour at more of a tempo, because running off the bike after doing 4 hours is going to be difficult to run a threshold, and running really slow, if you're doing a 70.3 race, is maybe not the way you want to be feeling like coming off the bike. So we might only do a short burst, but we're sort of sitting in that in between, then replicating what they might be doing off the bike. But again, it's just a race specificity type thing. It's not necessarily a physiological adaptation we're chasing.
Yeah, and I think if you're talking about like a 5K runner, for example, you could go do your tempo, but tempo is still a pretty hard session. So you're almost better off doing a zone 2, keeping it easy, and then being fresh to do a higher intensity session the next day, versus doing a tempo and then being fatigued for your hard session. So really keep those easy sessions easy and those hard sessions hard. But another thing I just thought of then is something I do prescribe in that race specific stage. It doesn't really matter who you are, is something like a monofartlek session, or something which you probably wouldn't really classify it as tempo. It's probably more on the threshold side. But if let's say your threshold's 4-minute K pace, you go out and do 90 seconds at 3:45, and then you do a 90-second float at, say, 4:45. So 4:45 is not your zone 2. That's probably your tempo pace, but sort of going a little bit above your race pace or your threshold pace, and then having a recovery of the float really at a tempo pace and repeating that again. That's going to be a little bit more specific to a 5K, if you do 20 minutes continuously of 90 seconds at 105% FTP and 90 seconds at 85%, which is your tempo, just do that for 20 minutes continuously. That'll be a little bit more stimulating in the sense that you're above threshold, but also, you're not having that full recovery either. If you just did 20 minutes flat out at 4-minute Ks, if that's your threshold, that'd be pretty hard, as would 3:45 and a 4:45 float. But because you're spending more time at or slightly above your threshold, you could look at the stimulus there. So I think from a continuous tempo run perspective, it's probably not as useful, but there are ways that you can still use that grey or that tempo zone in an interval to manipulate the intensity of the session. Maybe you don't want to run at 3:20s, that's too fast for you, it's going to cause too much fatigue, but 3:45s are just a little bit faster than your threshold. With a float recovery, you can still sort of have some recovery, but it's not black and white in terms of being easy or hard. So it's a good variety session. I did one with Pete the other day and he bloody hates it. And I hated it too because I'm not fit either at the moment, but it is a good session. Like, we got 20 minutes of effort time, 20 minutes of float, absolutely spent, but I still think I prefer doing that over a 5K time trial. Anything else, or we wrap this one up?
I think that's probably it for this one.
Cool. So in summary, guys, tempo and threshold are very similar. Threshold is a little bit harder than tempo. So roughly speaking, 95 to 105% would be what your threshold range is, and then sort of take off 10%, 85 to 95% would be your tempo. Tempo, you could hold that continuously. It's your comfortably hard sort of marathon pace, 30, 60, 90 minutes, even longer, continuously, versus your threshold. You could hold theoretically for 45 to 60 minutes, but it is very strenuous, very mentally challenging. So we tend to break it down into 5, 10, 20-minute blocks with about half the recovery. It's definitely more stimulating physiologically to do a threshold session. At or above threshold is always going to be better from a stimulus perspective, but tempo is more race specific for people doing things like a marathon or an Olympic distance triathlon or above, anything above sort of 2 hours. Then tempo is definitely more specific and something that we'd recommend 6 to 8 weeks out just to get used to that race pace intensity. Hopefully you found that useful. Any questions, let us know. Otherwise, we'll speak to you in the next episode.